Ruben Swartz here, your host and chief nerd. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, where I try to distill years of struggling with sales and marketing so you can learn the easy way. Plus, get the scoop from other folks who have accidentally ended up in sales and learned that it doesn't have to suck. Now, as a software person who hated conventional CRMs, I ended up creating my own for folks like me in professional services who would rather be doing client work than sales and marketing. It's got a whole new take on lead magnets, a new way to think about conversations and referrals, proposal automation, e-signature. And if you're the only one in your company selling, or maybe the only person in your company, it's got features so you don't feel so alone. Start your free trial at Mimiran.com. That's Mimiran.com. And even if you're not looking for a CRM, you'll find proposal templates, checklists, and more to help you grow your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Angelique Rewers, the CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, who helps consultants sell to large enterprises. She has been involved on both the buy side and the sell side, and we're going to get into that in a moment. And she's also helped thousands of consultants sell to larger companies who actually pay bills and pay them on time and pay reliably and so on and so forth. There's going to be a lot of great stuff in here, so let's get into it. Angelique, welcome to Sales for Nerds. What do you have in your glass?
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. So this is Empathy Wine, which I'm sure many of your listeners know was co-founded by Gary Vee. And I love it. It's one of my favorite everyday wines, full-bodied, really affordable, but absolutely delicious. And of course, it's completely sustainable. So that's my favorite wine to drink in the evening with dinner.
Awesome. I have to check that out. I haven't tried that. I've got some Wind Gap Pinot Noir from Sonoma Coast. A little bit light, very easy drinking. Exactly the kind of thing that you should be having when you're getting into a deep, detailed discussion of selling to the enterprise.
Love it.
So how did you get started on this mission of, I'm going to help consultants sell to large companies? That's not, what most of us dream of growing up.
It's certainly not. It was an accident. I spent about 10 years in the corporate space, and I always worked directly with the C-suite. I'm going to say I was a little lucky in the early days of my career. I landed this unbelievable job in a global consulting company. And day one, they asked me to go support the CEO. And I ended up doing a lot of his special projects and just had unbelievable access to the C-suite for 10 years. And so during that time, I hired a lot of outside consultants, vendors, suppliers, coaches, anything and everything, even mural painters. I mean, anything you can imagine, Ruben, I hired it. And then one night I was actually signing off on invoices from all of these outside consultants that I was working with on our annual report. We had a huge budget. Our budget for the annual report was close to $2 million, counting printing and everything. So I'm signing off on all these invoices. It's about midnight. I'm the last one in the office. And I'm looking at the numbers on these invoices, and I know how much work they've done. Okay. Like I know the amount of work they've done in terms of vis-a-vis what I'm paying them. And it really hit me like a V8 moment. If I'm the one managing them and I'm the one really directing their work, why am I not one of them? I'm paying bills that in a month they're earning my entire annual salary. So I put in my resignation. I started my own consulting business, selling to corporate. And about 2 years into that, I ended up going to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. And I had an entire presentation on how to get booked for media, but they hijacked my presentation. All they wanted to know was how was I getting all of those corporate clients? And no matter how much, Ruben, I wanted to talk about PR and media, every question was driving me back to, but what did you do to get that client? And so two of the women at the conference ended up chasing me. I mean, they were practically stalking me, begging me to take them on as clients to help them get corporate clients.
And you're like, maybe the thing is not getting the PR, it's getting the corporate clients. The universe is telling me something here.
Well, it was pretty much a 2x4, right? So that's how I started the company. It really was an accident. It was not part of the plan. It was just one thing led to the next. And there's that great quote from the book, Selling the Invisible, which is if you listen closely enough, your customers explain your business to you. Yes. And that's basically what happened. My market, and I wasn't even really trying to work with women business owners or small business owners, but they kept asking. And I thought, maybe there's an opportunity here. So here, that was 10, that by the way, that was actually 11 years ago. 10 years ago, we became the corporate agent. So we've been doing this for a decade now.
Okay, so let's go back because there's a couple intriguing parts of that story I want to ask more questions about. So how long did it go from I'm having this light bulb moment looking at this invoice report to I'm actually starting my own business?
2 months.
2 months. So it was pretty much like that. And then how did you
I was pissed. Yeah.
How did you get all those clients?
So the first thing is when I walked in to resign with my boss, he made a deal with me that number one, if I stuck out for 2 more months, that they would pay my annual bonus. So so he kind of bought some time with me, and that gave me a little bit of runway. And I mention that now because some people are going to have an opportunity with the layoffs and things that are coming. Hilton just laid off 22% of their corporate staff. You're going to have people who this is their opportunity. When companies downsize, they're going to ask people to raise their hand and take a severance. And for some folks, it's the moment to start their business, right? So I did get that bonus, which really helped give me some runway. He also said, if you're interested in taking us on as a client, we'll take you, we'd love to work with you. So I walked out of that resignation meeting with a client. But really what I did is pick up the phone and I started calling every person that I ever worked with. And I didn't have a plan. I did not have a strategy at this point in time. I just knew that I needed to start telling people. So I didn't worry about a website. I didn't worry about, a business card. And part of the reason why that's true, Ruben, is because one of the highest paid consultants who I was signing off on an invoice for that night that I had the V8 moment, he didn't have a website. His business card had his first name, his last name, his Yahoo email address, and his cell phone, and that was it. He didn't even have a company name. And we were paying him hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And he was working with 4 other major energy companies. So I knew that I didn't have to have. So I just picked up the phone and I started dialing.
I think that's great. And for folks who listen to this show regularly, you know how much I get on people's case. You have to pick up the phone. Even if you're introverted like me, you got to tell people. And I love this story because so many people are like, oh, I'm starting a business. I need a website. I need a logo. I need all this BS. And I'm like, do your close friends know what you're doing? Do the people you've worked with in the past who are in your ideal target market know what you're doing? Oh, no, but I'm about to send out an email newsletter to them, right? Doesn't work. Pick up the phone, call, and have a real conversation.
It doesn't work. Now, I was terrified to pick up the phone. I had a lot of the same concerns in the beginning that I bet people in your circle talk about, which is I don't want my friends, my former coworkers to see me as being salesy. Or needy, salesy or needy. I don't want them to I don't want to put them in a position where they're going to have to reject me because that's going to be awkward for both of us. So one of the things I knew right away was as a decision maker, the worst thing I had to do was reject someone. It was really uncomfortable for me as a decision maker to tell them no. And I think we forget about that as that the decision makers that we're selling to, they are people just like us. They hate awkward conversations. And that's why they go radio silent on you. That's why they ignore you because they really are. It's not just because they're busy. It's because they're uncomfortable. They don't want to hurt your feelings and they don't want that awkward moment. So I knew when I picked up the phone that I couldn't call and try to sell them something. That I needed to approach it in a way where they could just give me a congratulations. They could just say, congratulations on taking this step, Angelique. So I really structured those calls, Ruben, so that there was an easy way that I wasn't asking them for anything. I wasn't putting them out. It just started the process. And I just told them, I just want to plant the seed with you that I'm looking for so if anyone ever says to you that they're looking for help for X, Y, and Z, would you be willing to just keep me in mind if someone else asks you for that?
Right.
So that there was no awkward. So that was really the first thing that I did. Turns out 3 phone calls in, somebody actually did know somebody. And she wouldn't make the introduction because I asked for the introduction. She told me, no, I'd feel better if you just reached out to her directly. So then I had to make that call. And that was a much scarier call to make to say, hi, I'll call her Jane, hi, Jane, this is who I am and this is why and so said to call you. And I was really bracing for a huge rejection. She said, great, how much are you going to charge me? I need help with this. And I gave her a number and she goes, that's a little high. I know I'm your first client. How about this instead? And I said, yes. And I have my first real client. I didn't count my boss as a first client.
Okay.
I had my first client that way.
So this is just the power of outreach and connecting with people, human to human, as it were.
Human to human. It's always human to human. Yeah. No matter how many steps we put in front through social media and websites, those are all just things that we do to put us further and further away from the conversation. And so no matter how far away we put, it ultimately comes back down to the conversation.
Amen. And I think as someone who's techie and introverted, I tried for a long time to substitute technology for conversation. Yeah. And I think of it as it's like eating fast food all the time. It's cheap and convenient, but it's not very nourishing, and it will actually like make you sick. And
I love that analogy.
And instead, I try to think of it as, can I use technology to facilitate more conversations with the right people?
Yeah, we're always talking about, number one, putting as few steps as possible between you and the decision maker for the conversation. You actually want to accomplish it with as few steps as possible. What's really interesting is that when we work with small business owners, consultants, et cetera, who are trying to sell to corporate, and they tell us what they're doing to get those conversations, it's really interesting watching how they have twisted themselves into as many steps as possible. They have and I'm like, well, have you just called them or emailed them to see if you can call them? I mean, why are you doing all of these extra steps? And I think part of it is the fault of the small business coaching space that has often created elaborate systems to sell to small business owners. And so we really have muddied the water, I think, as an industry for people.
I think that's a great point. So we're going to do the time warp again back to, okay, these people are chasing you down. They're like, we don't care about PR, but we want to know how you get these clients. And you're thinking, maybe the universe is telling me something. How do you decide to make that kind of your purpose?
Well, I didn't do it all the way at first. I still tell all my clients this: don't ever turn off one faucet of revenue before you're certain you want to start another one, right? Like, we all jump from one thing to the next and we start marrying every idea. We never date an idea. Let's just date ideas, okay?
I love that.
So I decided to date the idea. So this one woman in particular, she actually showed up at my front door. She didn't live far from where I was in Baltimore at the time. And so I decided to take her on as a client. So I was still doing all of the work. All my team was doing the work with the corporate clients. We were still doing all of that. And I took her on as a client. And then I ended up taking a friend of hers on as a client and then another person. And I actually learned some things that I liked and didn't like about working with small business owners. In the beginning, I made some big mistakes, besides for undercharging significantly. I didn't have a red velvet rope to really make sure that I was working with the right people. The other thing is I was not only doing the consulting, the coaching, the training, I was doing the done for them marketing pieces, because one of the biggest problems that small business owners suffer from is lack of copywriting skills.
Yes.
And so I'm an international award-winning copywriter. And so I don't want to say it's easy for me, but I have that skill so honed. And so I wanted to write everything perfectly for them. It was so laborious, and it actually put me in sort of a vendor role to their company versus an advisory role to their company. And so instead of having meaningful strategy conversations, we would be arguing over a subject line or something. So I figured out a lot of things. It actually took 2 years between when I took on that first small business owner client and when I started the corporate agent business. So I actually dated the idea for 2 full years.
I love that notion of dating an idea. I'm going to use that a bunch. I was actually reading an interview with Mark Andreessen recently where he talks about how people get married to, they think their ideas are their children.
Yes, they do. We call it the baby. We say it's the baby.
Right. And it's not. It's just an idea. And you're free to have another one whenever you like, and you can abandon the old one.
Anytime.
Okay. So now you've decided you're going to focus on this. How did you figure out, you mentioned initially that you undercharged, you didn't have a good velvet rope. Tell me more maybe about the velvet rope issue.
Yeah, so not everyone should sell to corporations or mid-market companies or universities, nonprofits. We really help our clients sell to any of those B2B organizations, really anything with over 100 employees. And I think number one is if someone comes to us and doesn't already have corporate clients, we just need to make sure that they are really looking for that. I think a lot of people are in love with the idea of owning a business, but they're not really in love with the responsibility that comes with owning a business. And so that's a big thing that we check for. Again, back to the muddied water, we really have filled people's heads with all sorts of ideas about freedom-based businesses and passive income and all of these things. What's really funny is the people behind those ideas really work their tails off in their business, right? They're like really working their tails off. So we check for that. And I think the other thing is a degree of business acumen, and really honing their craft, making sure that they do know what they're doing. They don't have to know corporate, but they do need to be at the top of their game in their business with whatever they're bringing to the table, because companies do have choices as to who they work with. So there's definitely things there. And also, we have I don't know if I can cuss on this, but we have a no a-hole policy. I'll say it that way. We don't work with anyone who doesn't understand what it means to take 100% responsibility for their choices and their life and all that goes with it. So that was a big one in the early days. We figured that out though about a year or two.
And then how did you decide to grow the corporate agent, and tell me a little bit more about that journey over the past 10 years?
Well, for the first 5 years, we were continuing to grow that while we were also doing a ton of work with corporate. We do much less now, much more selective, although we're ramping that side back up again. So it's been kind of this seesaw, if you will, that, it got to the point where we couldn't keep going with everything we had going on the corporate side and truly grow out the corporate agent. And so what's interesting though is I actually feel like I work with more corporate today than I did then. And the reason I say that is because I live through my clients. And so I'm seeing all of their work. I'm often reviewing their work. I'm pretty much for the higher end clients, I'm going back and forth with them on the sales conversation. So I feel like I'm actually doing more work with corporate now through our,
right.
All of our clients. But yeah, it just got to the point of a bandwidth and a lifestyle issue for me of feeling like being pulled in two different directions. It was really after a big conference that we hosted in 2013 and then into the 2014 year that things just exploded for our business. And I had to make that choice. It's, I was on Necker last year, and Richard was talking about his decision to sell Virgin Records in order to be able to do Virgin Airlines, and having to make that choice. And I think a lot of it's come to that place where it's like we had the thing that got us started, and it's not that we don't love it, but we can't go build this next thing unless we make a choice to let go of something. And I just had to make that space in my life.
So the faucet was flowing enough that you could go shut the other one off.
It was like a fire hose at that point.
Nice.
So I felt like I was getting fire hosed from both directions, which then it's that split. It's like that straddled fence problem. And when you're not willing to commit to one direction or the other, so one of my clients said something, it's probably a famous quote, but like when you sit on the fence, you just get pooped on by birds. Something to that effect. Right. I'm sure I butchered that a little bit, but you get the idea. So I had to make a decision, but it really was the right decision for us. I mean, the types of things that small business owners are able to do with corporate, we call it a force multiplier effect. Because what happens when you get one yes with a large organization, it's what the military calls a force multiplier. It's, your reach, your connections, your impact, your income, all of it just goes through the roof when you're getting those yeses.
Great. So let's talk about folks who are trying to get into corporate C-suites or whatever larger clients they're trying to land. What should they be thinking about? What are the things they're likely screwing up if they're listening to this?
Well, the first is probably buying into the nonsense that content is king. Content is a commodity. Uh, you know, Conversations are king. Cash flow is king. There's lots of things we could argue are king. It's definitely not content. Content is a commodity. So I think the first thing that they're screwing up is spending too much time creating things that no one's reading or is just nice information to have, but it's not actually affecting forward motion toward a sale. So I think Tony Robbins is the first person who said proximity is power. But if you're not getting proximity every single day to that world, then you're in already a disadvantage. So you've got to put yourself into those environments, even if it's a virtual environment. Even if it's unbelievable to me the number of industry associations out there that have webinars that are completely open, that you can listen to and ask questions on those webinars and basically get free market research by just putting yourself on a webinar or a Zoom session, with industry association. So proximity is power. You've got to start with the content. I'm not saying you can't have a couple of critical keystone pieces, but just churning out content is not the answer. These decision makers are very, very busy and they buy from people that they know about. They don't go searching, through the, halls of LinkedIn to find you.
So unless you have a best-selling book or something like that.
Yeah, at least that's a good keystone piece of content, right? Instead of just, blog article after blog article after blog article. If you're going to do content, then at least write for those industry associations, at least write for an organization that has a built-in audience for you instead of building your own audience from the ground up, which is tough to do today. Go onto the podcast of the industry associations, write for their magazines, write for their blogs, do webinars for them. If you're going to do content, at least do it in a place where you're already guaranteed an audience.
That's a great point. So don't try to climb up the dual hills of creating the content and finding an audience for it. Deliver content to an audience that's pre-made for you, where someone's going to help you promote.
Yeah. And then besides for the credibility factor, right? So now you're building your credibility factor. In addition to that, though, you can repurpose it. Speaking of Gary Vee and the whole, cascade thing, which, by the way, corporate communications people have been using a cascade strategy and a repurposing strategy for 30 years. So it's great to see it getting into this environment too. But, you can repurpose all that content onto your own channels. You definitely want to do that. But you need to put it where the decision makers are actually going to see it. And that's not on your platform by and large, unless you're like a Simon Sinek or something.
Right. Unless you're already there. That's
right. But if you're not already there, you've got to go to where the audience already is. Okay.
And then you mentioned earlier how you got your clients, right? You made a bunch of phone calls. Tell us about what people should be doing with phone calls.
Yeah. So one of the big things that we're keen on and that we emphasize with our clients, and I didn't do this in the beginning, right? I had to put this all together and figure it all out. But I realized as I went on to create these conversations and continue to pick up the phone, that unless a decision maker really felt like they had a need to use my services or to buy from me, they didn't want to meet with me.
Right.
And I found out that was really problematic because they often did have a need, but they didn't know that they had a need, or they were making assumptions about what we did that were typically wrong. Most of them maybe get 5% of what you do and not the other 95%. And also, if they've already decided what they need and they're at that stage, now it's so late in their thinking process that you can't really shape it or influence it. They've gone too far down a path and now they're attached to their baby, which is their idea. So I was really obsessed with this idea, and I really got obsessed with this idea about 8 or 9 years ago, which is how can I be obsessive about creating conversations with decision makers when they don't have a need for my services, when they don't want to buy anything from me. And I think that's where 99% of sales training goes wrong. Because when they're talking about email prospecting, they're talking about phone prospecting, they're talking about getting over sales objections, Ruben, it's always around this idea of trying to convince them that they do. And I'm like, well, that's really trying to row against the current. What if we could row with the current, which is actually create reasons that they want to meet with me just to give them something that they need now that's on their actual task list, and that we can have a conversation now. It has nothing to do with selling them anything. It's merely to A, get FaceTime, B, get to know what's going on in their head, C, learn a little bit more about their organizations, and D, plant some seeds with them that will grow. And so that really became my obsession, was creating reasons to have those conversations when they don't think they need to buy from you. And that's been kind of like a call to fame part of the work that we do, is helping our clients figure that out. But most people are trying to figure out, well, how can I convince them that they need X? And I'm like, look, guys, that's the wrong question. You just need to convince them to spend time with you. That's the real question. And so that was really a big part of it, was creating those excuses.
So how do we do that? How do we tell these really busy people who are at least as overscheduled as we are that they should spend some time with us?
So the number one thing is to think about their task list, not their problems. Okay. So everybody wants to talk about solving problems. And I'm not saying as a consultant or a coach or a professional service provider that you don't solve problems. But the problem with giving that advice to most small business owners is they end up in this sort of nebulous place with that concept. They go into this place of, well, I'm trying to help them achieve high performance, or I'm helping them to improve their company culture and not have so much toxicity in their company culture. That's like a great one. So that's fine. So let's pretend I'm looking at my kind of journal over here of my to-do list, and I have a team. Nowhere on my to-do list is reduce company culture toxicity. Like, that's not a task
right
on my to-do list. It might be a problem in an organization, but it's not a task.
Right.
So when you want to have those more urgent conversations, you have to figure out what's on their to-do list. And you have to start bringing things to them. And I'll give you a perfect example that one of my clients used on. So this is the best. Ruben, when my clients use my own strategies back at me, I feel like we're making progress, right? So I have an event coming up in October. It's called The Real Deal. And one of my clients is an event planner. And she knows that we're debating, what are we going to do about this event in October? Are we going to have it, or are we going to go all virtual with it? So she knows that we're doing that. So she sent me an email that said something to the effect of, I know you're grappling with this decision, or I'm guessing you are, because the event's in October and everybody who has an event is grappling with this decision. Okay. So she knows I have an event on my calendar and I'm a few months away now. What is it? June, July, August, September, 5 months. So I must be dealing with this. And she said, you're probably having meetings with your team, and we have noticed some big hiccups, that some other events that went virtual, some real missteps that some other events have made. And I'd love to take 30 minutes. I'm not selling you anything. I would just love for 30 minutes to share with you the 3 big things I see everybody screwing up right now, because I know you want to have a flawless event if you have to go virtual. And so she sent me that email. I'm not in a place right now where we're considering outside vendors, but I want to have that conversation with her. I have a meeting all day with my team this week, all day, planning this event. Her timing, her assumptions were impeccable. And she's offering me 30 minutes to share with me the missteps of my competitors. You are damn straight I want to know the missteps of my competitors. So that's the kind of message that gets a meeting.
Right.
She didn't try to sell me a damn thing.
Yep.
And there are others that you can use as well. Like, one of the ones that drives me nuts is when people go out speaking. This is a soapbox of mine. It drives me crazy. This is one of my favorite. We call them bridge strategies, because you bridge from the visibility into a conversation. People think of them as a call to action. Most calls to action are a very simple dead end kind of a thing. But a bridge bridges you into a meaningful conversation. So one of my favorites is if I speak at an event and I have a bunch of decision makers from different companies in my audience. Usually it's just one decision maker from every corporation or company that's there. They only send one person. So usually if I get a really resounding, enthusiastic response from that audience and they're just like, wow, then, and I can feel it. You can feel it, right? Like in a room when that happens, I will say, listen, I obviously can't do this for everyone. But if there are any of you in this room that are wishing your entire team had a chance to hear this presentation, I would be more than happy to do this presentation for you, your team, your colleagues, whether in person or we can do it virtually. I will do this as an encore for your team so that you're not the only one who's going back fired up about these strategies. Now what's going to happen is the audience is going to come up to me, and it's not just about getting their business card. Now I have to actually set up calls with them to arrange that encore presentation. And then I'm going to ask questions like, well, what about this presentation do you want me to spend more time on? Is there anything you want me to add in? And then people ask these crazy questions to me, Ruben, like, well, aren't you going to charge for that? Well, no, that's my marketing. I would rather give an hour talk to a whole bunch of decision makers inside of a company and have, I mean, do you know how much money you would spend to even get there if you're just doing marketing? So no, I'm not charging for it. Of course I'm not. I just want to get, why would I do that? I have an opportunity to get in front of these decision makers and actually give. So when it comes to building relationships, you really need to go first in investing in that, and then I'll stop. But this is my soapbox. So you've got to invest in those relationships, and you have to not have an energy of, well, I'm just doing this, waiting to put my hand out to get something back, because we can all feel that, right?
Right. You're out there just trying to be helpful, because that's what your mission is. Beyond the profit and loss. Right.
Yeah. And when you're doing that, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I hopped on the phone with someone earlier this week, and it was a relationship building thing. We've been in talks about doing something with their corporation. He happened to know we've been talking to a lot of corporate decision makers, seeing what's going on inside their event. He asked if I would share some things. The conversation went so well at the end of it. He's making an introduction and a recommendation for me to something I wouldn't even have known to ask for. And it's coming from that, because it was just about the long-term investment in that relationship.
Yeah, just being genuine, especially because so many of the people out there are pitching and selling and being salesy, whether or not they really want to be that way. They think they have to be that way when they're dealing with the companies. And I know I tried that for a long time when I was selling to big companies. Like, this is a disaster. Yeah. It's not even who I am. I hate it, and it doesn't work. Like, why don't I just try to be helpful? And then everyone's so much happier.
It's a lot easier for the corporate decision maker, because then they don't feel like they have to dodge you. And I think if you think about, if you're using strategies that make people want to dodge you, that's why do we even teach that? Why does anyone teach that? But that's really what's created by a lot of the strategies that are out there. And I think it all starts with this idea of assuming that the person that you're reaching out to has any need for your services at all. And 99% of sales and marketing strategies make that assumption when they're doing the outreach, that the person on the other side actually needs you. And you don't know the first thing about that person or that company. So you can't really make that assumption. I think that's really one of those come from energies that's very problematic in growing your business. And worse, it actually makes most consultants and coaches and other small business owners avoid doing the things that would get them business, because it creates this awful feeling in them too.
Yes.
So it's like, none of it makes any sense at all. And I don't know how we got here, but you and I think have a similar mission, in that we would really like to free the world, rid the world of those strategies.
Well, I don't know if this is true or not, but one of the things that I sort of developed a hypothesis of after I went through this whole journey myself was so much of the sales techniques and training and things I was trying to employ, it was as if I was like salesperson number 10,000 at IBM or whatever. And there's a whole set of training and right. tools and books and whatever that's geared towards that salesperson, because those are the VPs of sales that buy all the stuff.
Right.
And if you have 10,000 people, you kind of like tell them to go be aggressive, and you fire 90% of them in 5 years, but the
That's
few
right.
superstars do great. And that works for that business model. But if you're a small business owner or a consultant and it's all on you, that's a disastrous way to spin the roulette wheel, right?
That is so brilliant. That is so, there's another thing. You're the first person, obviously I've talked about sales for 10 years. You are the first person who has said that, Ruben. That is one of the most insightful things I've heard about sales.
What exactly did I say? I want to know exactly.
I know. Well, the fact of who all of that was designed for and their business model that it was designed for and how it has absolutely no relevance. So here's the other part of it. All of the business that you get when you're a small business owner comes from people who either know you, they know someone who knows you, or they've met you through something. Okay, that's like it's like 3 orbits of, sort of like in terms of degrees of separation from you, right? What's interesting is all of those strategies also are very alienating to anybody who you have a relationship with. And so it's even worse because you're really employing strategies, like you said, that were for salesperson number 10,000 on the IBM list. But that is where a lot of the sales techniques were all, it was also the whole just sort of dialing for dollars. And, sales guys used to, there was a technique where they would have like a business card or a lead card. And if the person wasn't interested, they would like tear it up. Literally, they would tear up the business card or they would tear up the lead card and they would drop it in the trash can as they dialed for dollars from, even IBM in the typewriter sales days. And one of my bosses, one of our chief marketing officers at a major corporation I worked for, she was a typewriter salesperson at IBM in her original job. So she told me some of these stories, and they would tear up the business cards. They would tear up the lead cards. But that tells you how little they valued the leads, how little they valued the relationship, that if it wasn't an immediate sale, they would tear it up. And we still have legacy of that in a lot of the techniques that are out there.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And again, like if you are trying to make your quarterly numbers at IBM, and there's a whole other conversation to be had about the pressure to make the quarterly numbers, right? There's a reason that people act that way, and it's not just because they're jerks. Some of them might be jerks, but there's a lot of incentives that are driving that kind of behavior. But when you're running your own business, like, you got to pay the bills, but you're trying to create something bigger than yourself, something that's meaningful. Most people I know who are starting their own business, they're not trying to make their quota. That's not what gets them up in the morning. They're trying to be helpful to people.
Right.
And you don't want to be employing, like you say, these techniques that are alienating.
Well, and they really don't work that well because, especially if you're selling to organizations, because you can't drive urgency on their part. You just cannot drive urgency on their part. So they have so many competing priorities, so many interdependencies that are happening inside their organization that pushing really, not only is it going to push them away from you, but it's not going to affect a sale because you can't affect a sale from the outside. What you can do is find a way to get to the table to just build a relationship and have conversations, because then you will find out what is actually on their to-do list in the next 30 days. And if you have a chance to educate them about what you do and talk to them and say, well, you might not realize this about us, but just so you know, we recently helped a company to blah, blah. And that's the best way to say it. We recently helped another company or another team to do blah, blah, blah. So I just want you to know that. And if you want to know some of the lessons that we learned out of that, I'd be happy to share some of those lessons with you, because now I can have a conversation with the decision maker about that project specifically. And there is no way in hell I'm leaving that meeting without that client at that point, because I am bringing to them all the things that they don't even know they should be thinking about.
Got it.
And
okay.
If you can have, if the magic words in sales, to me, the most important words in sales are, from the client side, from the prospect side, is, I've never thought about it that way before. The second, if you can get them to say that, now it's really your opportunity to lose. That to me is the buying signal. That trumps all others, is I've never thought about it that way before. Because now you just proved your value to them.
Got it. Okay. And you
right?
said
So,
something
yeah.
really interesting. I didn't mean to cut you off, but you said something really
No, it's
interesting
like,
about like how hard it is to create urgency. And one of the things I remember when I was consulting for these giant companies was the CEOs and the other executives, they couldn't freaking create urgency.
right,
Right? Like they couldn't do it. What makes you think that I'm going to do it from outside? They were
right.
trying to get people to do stuff faster, better, and they were going crazy trying to do that.
That, you know what, that is really an excellent point. The CEOs, the bosses can't seem to create urgency for people that technically they could fire.
Right.
I mean, if right, and they can't create urgency. So, there's so many, the ocean currents go in so many different directions inside of a company. And so, trying to push, imagine going out into the ocean and stopping a wave from coming in. That's really what you would be doing. That's absurd. So you have to understand how to ride the wave, not try to control the wave. And I think that just understanding that difference in the come from. But that all went back to one of the things I did, kind of time warping back. So after I won that first client from that phone call, Ruben, about 3 weeks later, I realized I had to get more clients. And I knew I needed to be more strategic than just calling people. Like I needed to start to build a better approach. So a good friend of mine, she took me out to dinner. We went to Chili's and we basically had margaritas and dessert. That is what I counted at dinner at that point. And I'm sort of crying into my chocolate lava cake and my margarita at this point because I don't want to be salesy. I don't, and I'm hysterical at this point because it really hit me a few weeks in that I was going to really have to grow this consulting business. I left a pretty big my husband's looking at me like, you said you'd bring in clients, so where are they, So I'm out at Chili's, crying in my margarita, and she stopped me and she said, wait a second, you've been hiring outside people, companies, vendors for like 10 years now. Where is the list of all of the things that worked on you and all of the things that didn't work on you? Why have you not done the do this, don't do this list?
Right.
So after I, was sober again from my margaritas because I had a couple that night, the next day I built that list. And that really formed the foundation of our company. Like that, obviously new techniques come in, or you can tweak something, add, LinkedIn tech, there's different things like bomb videos. There's always things you can add in. But really for 10 years, that list hasn't really changed. And I will say, I think that's really important to remember right now, given everything that's happening in the world and the fact that companies are going to be going through a lot over the next 18 months plus, to remember that no matter what's going on with technology, no matter what's going on in the marketplace, that at the end of the day, humans haven't changed, right? Like we, in terms of our fears, our stress, how we make decisions. I mean, all of that, Ruben, everything is changing. And yet the people at the center, I mean, I certainly hope our awareness about certain things is changing and our compassion and our willingness to learn and understand. But in terms of what drives human psychology and behaviors, that hasn't changed,
right,
no matter what's going on out there.
So what do we need to know from that list? What are the secret items of do's and don'ts?
Well, one of them is that corporate decision makers have no idea how to buy your services, or even to ask for what they should be asking for. Like that was on my do list. It was the folks who came in and said, Angelique, I know you're asking me for this, but I really think it would save you a lot of time and a lot of stress if I just took 20 minutes to share a couple of things with you. It's going to save you so much stress and worrying, coming back, wishing you would have approached this a little bit differently. Can I just take 20 minutes? I think it's going to save you 20 weeks of time. So that idea of the understanding that your corporate decision makers do not know how to buy from you. They don't know what to ask you for. They don't know how to move the process forward. They're never taught how to do that. The head of HR, the head of finance, the head of facilities management, they don't know how to buy from you. And they learned bad habits from their boss, who learned bad habits from their boss. So that was a big one for me, Ruben, was just understanding that I have to come to every meeting with an actual plan. And I have to tell the client that the most beneficial, useful thing that we could do in this conversation is accomplish A, B, and C. And if we can accomplish A, B, and C in this meeting, then the next meeting we can accomplish D, E, F. But like really knowing how to gently have that conversation, not in a way where I'm, patronizing them, right? Or being condescending to them, but really just from this complete energy of if we did this in this meeting, this is what it's going to save you. We might even mention something that you didn't even know existed as an option for you. And that now you're getting into a human fear, which is that fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
And corporate decision makers have FOMO.
Right.
So if you mention, I would love to share a couple of things with you because I'd hate for you to miss out on what some of your competitors or peers in the industry are doing that might actually be better for you. Can I share that with you? And if you ask, so that was the other thing, asking permission. Mm-hmm. We teach our clients to ask permission. Do you mind can I go ahead and share something with you? I think you'd really find it useful. It's amazing when you ask that what it does to the subconscious brain, to get that permission. So that would be another big one off that list.
And I think that's the kind of thing also that if you were talking to a friend who was trying to do something, you'd say, well, hold on, because when I was helping Bob move, what really saved a bunch of time was, right? Like if you treat them like a friend,
that's right.
That's how you would talk to them.
That's right. What you don't do is say some nonsense like, if I could show you how to fix your problem today, Bob, would you be ready to sign on the dotted line? Because I had vendors do that to me as a corporate decision maker, and I never wanted to take another phone call from them again.
Right. Like, no, I'm not buying a used car today. Thank you. I'm trying to fix my business.
Well, and also, by the way, I obviously have 7 other colleagues who, are going to be impacted by this. And I have discussions I have to have. And so it really shows me you don't even understand how a real company operates.
Right.
To think that like I'm going to be buying the used car today.
Right.
So it just killed your credibility. So, I love your example about that. Hey, by the way, before you drag your furniture across your, linoleum floor and rip it, I have a suggestion. So coming from that energy, that was a huge one. Another big one on my list was I'll say I looked young as a corporate decision maker. I'm female. I'm petite, and I happen to look on the younger side, younger than I am. And so one of the big mistakes that a lot of vendors and service providers and consultants made was they would assume that my subordinates who worked for me, often men, were the decision makers in the room. And that was always really interesting when they wouldn't look at me and they would look at everyone else and they would check in with them and not realize that I was the one. So one of, just the basic dotting the I's, crossing the T's, understanding hierarchy, understanding who your customer is, those kinds of things were obviously on the list. I mean, it was a long list, but, those are some of the easy takeaways of just not making assumptions. And I think, especially with unconscious bias, we might not even realize we're making assumptions about the power dynamics, the decision-making dynamics inside of an organization. So you really have to be cautious about that, especially, nowadays, there's matrixed reporting inside of organizations and things like that. So really proceed with caution when you're dealing with multiple people in a meeting.
That's a great point. And it's funny because I've been in a lot of meetings where people look at other people around the table, and I'm not a very perceptive person. So if I perceive something's happening, it's got to be really blatant. Yeah. And it's like they are, sort of like the older and whiter and more male you are.
Oh yeah.
The more they are assuming that you're in charge of something, which in many cases, like there is a statistical validity to that bias.
Sure, of course.
But like you are just wrecking this meeting. And you're ignoring the person who actually knows what the hell she's talking about. Please stop doing that.
Yeah, we had a couple of those. Those were always the really interesting follow-up phone calls to the vendors. And I had a few of those. And in fairness, I was in my late 20s. I was young, but at the same time, I'm the one, you've got my business card. You can see the job titles on everybody's business card. I'm the one who reached out. I'm the one who called the meeting. So don't assume that because someone walks in that they're my superior. So there's those kinds of things that go on. One of the other things that I think is really important is just having forward momentum in a sale, and the idea of really understanding how to move things forward and always telling people how to move things forward, because otherwise things really get paralyzed. So that's a huge one. And then my other one is to always make sure you're bringing value to every conversation, not just at the beginning. Every single time I meet with a decision maker, I'm always saying, by the way, the last time we met, you mentioned this, and I just wanted to share this article with you, or I thought of you for this. And I always think about if they're only going to really remember the last conversation with me or the last meeting with me, because they have so much going on. So if you're not continuously reminding them of how valuable it is to have access to you, like, you want to be one of those people. In fact, the person who reached out to me this week, he said, Angelique, of all the people that I talk to, every time I have a conversation with you, you illuminate something for me that I hadn't thought about. And I so value being able to pick up the phone and talk to you. That's exactly what you want every prospect in your Rolodex to think about when they think of you.
That's great. Now, what kind of cadence should we be using to reach out to these folks and remind them of our value?
So I am a big believer that it should not be on a time schedule that they're like, well, it's been 2 weeks and I'm getting so I am much more of an organic. Now, that speaks a little bit to my Kolbe. For those of you who know Kolbe and sort of cognitive energy, I'm not someone who lives and dies by systems. I am much more. So I think number one, Ruben, and we do Kolbe assessments with everybody we work with. I think it's really important. It's a little understood part of the brain that the first thing that a business owner has to do is understand how their brain is actually wired. If they need that structure, then they better put it in place. If you work better without structure, which I do, like my brain actually gets very taxed and stressed when I'm overly structured. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's much more organic. What I do is I block out time on my calendar every week to do outreach and relationship building. And I am completely free form within that window. Okay. So if I have like 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon or a Wednesday morning, whatever it is, it's always on the calendar. I go with what I'm inspired by. If I read an article and I know 5 people on my prospect list would benefit from it, then I'm going to send it to them. So I'm a 6392. I'm a 9 quick start. I need that flexibility. If I don't have it, Ruben, I'm not going to do it. And if anyone's never done a Kolbe, it's Kolbe. It's one of the best assessments. It is not a personality assessment. It's a brain assessment about how you tackle problems and how you prevent problems and tackle projects. And it's mentally how your brain attacks something, takes it on. And so I need flexibility. So for me, that's what I do. At the end of the day, though, consistency beats perfection every day.
And you do have some structure, right? You have that time allotted in your calendar.
Time allotted. And I can drag it. So my rule is drag, don't delete. And what I mean by that is, if my team is like, no, you have this interview with Ruben, fine, then drag that time somewhere else. But that time, I never delete the time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the big things. And I think it's hard. A lot of people say they don't like too much structure, but you have to have enough structure that your creativity can flourish, kind of the way you've done it. And I try to do the same thing, right? I'm blocking out time. I'm going to be doing outreach. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing that. And so I don't have to think and just wonder, if I let my brain ponder too many possibilities, it doesn't do anything creative.
Right.
It just overloads and smokes and shuts down.
My favorite thing is to take what's in the news, the new study. So, we have lots of Google alerts set up for new studies on certain topics that we know are relevant to those in our prospecting list. I'm an avid reader. My husband asked me the other day, he's like, how many articles are you reading a day? But I read at an insane pace. I probably read somewhere between 75 and 100 articles a day.
Wow.
So I just consume tremendous amounts of information. Anytime I have a break in between anything, I'm consuming articles. So I always have something to send. And one of my favorite things to do is just to take something and boil it down into like the 3 key things instead of being like, hey, I don't know if you saw this new report from IBM, but you don't have to read the whole thing. I just think that on page, 57, what they're saying about X would be so useful to your team. People freaking love that. They have a reading pile on their desk that's this high. So if I can bring stuff to them, that's something I do. The other big part of the structure is to know who your prospects are. If you aren't looking at the list of who you should be reaching out to, you will forget people.
Yep.
So you have to me, like that, and then the time, that's the structure to me, is the who and the when. The what, have fun with the what. Make it your personality. I wrote an article on LinkedIn years ago. It went viral. It was crazy. They put it in their LinkedIn's newsletter. This article went viral, but it was called Stop Being So Boring. And it just like went around LinkedIn like wildfires. It was like a couple of years ago. And I still stand by that. Like, stop like with these newsletters, send these short, quippy emails. Like that's what actually makes a difference.
Human to human, right?
Human to human. And people are busy. They're reading on this, right? Like they're
Right.
reading on this. So they don't have time for your newsletter. If you send them a really quick text or a really quick article or something that someone else wrote, and if you actually, instead of writing the articles yourself, you actually spent your time sharing the most valuable stuff and boiling it down to the sort of the so what factor for your audience, like that's really where you can be a thought leader versus a copywriter.
That's
and
a great
I
point.
think if I could get people to shift from being copywriters to thought leaders.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. So I think a lot of this is be helpful, be human, and then when it's time for someone to buy, they don't actually know how to buy. And my whole thing is I still hate selling after all these years, but I don't mind making it easy for people to buy. Right? People love to buy when they're ready.
They do.
Don't make it hard for them. What should people do to make sure that it's easy for these corporate clients to buy when it's time?
Oh my gosh. So the one thing is to, start with proposals. We don't let our clients do proposals. We have them just figure all the details out with the client. Just deal with it with them, schedule enough time, tell them we need to schedule enough time. We call it co-creating to 100%. So you're scheduling it, you're dealing with it. Then tell them the easiest way to get started. Say, look, ultimately you want to do this, but this is what it looks like to get started. And tell them what it looks like to get started. That's the part that they just kind of, it's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic for the last like 90 days of closing a sale. Instead of just saying, listen, here's what phase 1 would look like. Let's pull out our calendars and figure it out. Here's what I would need from your end to get going. What does your company need from me? Do you even know what your company needs from me? Because a lot of them don't, because they're not in purchasing, they're not in procurement. So what does your company need from me? This is when we can get started. What conflicts could you have with that date? It's really about being, I have to say it, it's being an utter fucking control freak with getting to the, like, this is how we get started. It's on this date. It's with this in hand. We have to have a deposit. Do you know if you guys need business insurance from us or not? Have you ever, Mr. Head of Audit, have you ever set anyone inside of your company's accounts payable? Do you know how to do that? Or do I need to talk to accounts payable? So it's really talking about all of that, Ruben, where you're really getting into the exact specifics. Otherwise, you're dealing with weeks of back and forth. And then you know what happens? Companies put hiring freezes on outside vendors, spending freezes, a new priority comes up that trumps your priority. So if you don't have a meeting that goes through all of those things and you don't personally carry the ball into the end zone to score that touchdown, I'm a huge football fan. If you're not the running back with that ball tucked under your arm and you are like, come heck or high water, you're not getting into that end zone, you're going to lose the deal. But you have to tell them. And again, they don't know how to do that. Decision makers all over the company have absolutely no idea what they need to do to finish the deal.
I've experienced that. Like the VP who told me, no, you don't need to send me an invoice. We can just pay you. So
Yeah.
one thing I want to clarify, because
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of proposals, which I never
Yeah.
thought I would ever say. You're
Yeah.
saying you don't use proposals at all?
We don't. We do not use proposals at
Nothing
all.
gets signed. There's no written agreement.
So there's a contract. There is the contract with the client that has the deliverables in it. But the idea of putting together, I'm proposing this to you, I'm going to send that over to you. You're not going to read it. You're going to get confused. You're going to go straight to the last page and just read the freaking price. We do not do that at all. And honestly, this was one of the things that as a decision maker really was never super helpful to me anyway. We ended up, it was either tons of questions over email, or they put things in the proposal that we didn't understand. And then we found out we should have done something differently.
Yep.
The best ways that I ever worked with outside people, and then conversely now on my side when I'm selling to companies, is when I sit with the decision maker and I literally say, well, what we would like to do ideally is we'd come in the night before. Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned you're having all your customers there. We would like to be there because then we're going to get to know them. Then when we do our activity on the next day, we already have the know, like, trust factor. We can reference conversations we had the night before. We would do this, then we would do this. And then they're going to say, oh, well, we can't do that because at lunch we already, okay, fine. So then what about this? And you're literally working it all out and you're writing it down, or you're putting it on, Zoom in the chat, or you're using Microsoft Teams whiteboard or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, and you get it all worked out. You get it all worked out. Now, there are some techniques to that we teach, that we go into the details of that. But when you do that, you don't end up sending over a proposal that now they look at it, they're completely overwhelmed, they've bit off more than they can chew, and they either go radio silent or they just head to a no. And the worst thing to do is to have a prospect in a no. It is very hard to move people off a no. Right? So I don't want people to get into a no. I want to get people into a collaborative back and forth. And if they say something's okay and my gut says, I don't know, that's really going to be okay, I'm going to pull on that thread. I'm going to say, are you sure your corporate communications department is going to be okay with this? Because I have concerns that they're not going to be okay. Can we call them? Can you email them and find out? So it's this constant, I want to deal with every objection that they could possibly have. I am a radar system for all the things that are going to get in the way of moving forward. And a lot of people really try to just cross their fingers and close their eyes and hope nothing comes up.
Right. If I pretend it doesn't exist, it won't exist. And then you get bitten.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I'm digging for the problems. I'm actively digging for the problems. And the only way to dig for the problems is to get in there in the weeds with them and really talk through. So you want to do this training from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Do you not have any people on the West Coast? I thought you said you have people in Japan. You've got to figure this out for the client. They are so back to the human to human piece, Ruben, and really going past that sort of check the box answer of, understanding how your customers think. They are so stressed. They have so many emails. They have so many conference calls, so many Zoom calls. They are so overwhelmed. They're not thinking about all the details. So if you as the consultant don't bring up all the problems, then what's going to happen is you're going to send over the proposal. They are going to think of the problems. They're going to move into the no box, and you can't get them out of the no box once they go in. Okay. So don't do that. Don't do that.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I think we're actually saying the same thing just with different terminology, because my view is that having done it the way you talked about and sending over a bunch of those proposals, my view is that we co-create the proposal together. And it's my job to edit it into a form that because that's one of the things I take off their plate, right? I do all the stuff. I ask the right questions. I formulate it into a nice, shiny thing. They should read through it and be like, yep. Okay, you got it. Perfect. Let's go.
Right, but, which is very different than so the other way that happens when people hear proposal is they go in to meet with the decision maker. The decision maker sort of vomits onto the table all the things they are having problems with, all the things they don't want, what they say they need. And then they sit back in their chair and they say, so can you put together a proposal for me?
Yep.
And then so many consultants and experts say, okay. and then they go back to their office, right? And then
And
they pull
stress out and go crazy. So I'm
they pull out
told.
the Ouija board,
Yep.
and they're trying to guess what the client needs,
Yep.
right? Instead of just saying, hey, our next meeting, we need 90 minutes because here's what we're going to do in those 90 minutes.
Yep. And it's funny because like proposals are part of my tool.
Yeah.
And so I get a lot of calls from people. I've got a proposal due, end of business today. What should it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, right. And I feel bad because I've been in that situation so many times.
Right.
And it always ends with, I'm so glad you picked up the phone. You just called the wrong person. Call them. It doesn't matter if you think it's embarrassing to ask something you should have asked in the last meeting. It's okay that another thought occurred to you. Just do it right.
That's right. So we say that to people too. We're like, I know that you don't want to have to go back to them, but if nothing else, you can go back to them and say, as I was putting this together, some really inspired ideas came up, but I need to talk them through with you. So that's what we say. As I was putting it together, some really inspired ideas came up, and I need to talk them out with you. So I think the best use of time would actually be to schedule another conversation. I promise you it's going to be worth your time and actually save you a lot of time. Yeah. So I just have them go back and reschedule a meeting and go figure it out with the client. But to go back to your office and start guessing is crazy. Again.
And I've done it.
Right. Well, I did it back in the day. It's like, don't do that. And I should have known better because as the decision maker, there is nothing more frustrating. So in my column of like what not to do was I would get these proposals back. First of all, they didn't meet my needs at all. Right. And now I'm looking at this proposal like, I don't even think this is what I need. But I don't necessarily know because they're using all of this language to try to sound smart.
Yes, that's what I did.
But these words actually mean nothing.
Yes.
I don't know what this is.
Guilty.
So, yeah, right? I mean, we've all done it because we think that's how, and again, this is what happens inside of companies. They pass down what they saw other people do. It doesn't mean it's the right way to do it at all. It's just what got ingrained. It's terrible. But I think there's a lot of things legacy-wise we need to let go of, and that is one of them.
Yeah, and it's so funny because if you were trying to help a friend, you wouldn't do it that way.
No, I love that perspective. If you were trying to help a friend, is that what you would do? And by the way, if you had a conversation with a friend and then you went home and you thought about it, and it wasn't really the best idea to maybe take a ski trip in July after you thought about it, you would call the friend back and say, I was thinking about our plan, but I'm concerned there's not going to be any snow in July. Like you would go back and tell them that and you wouldn't think twice about it.
Right. You wouldn't go book a bunch of stuff and ask them to sign off on it and say, here's my PayPal link, reimburse me for your ticket.
Exactly. Of course you wouldn't do that. So I love that perspective, Ruben. I really do. I've never thought about it that way, but that's a really good come from. And I also think that people have to stop worrying about looking stupid.
Yeah.
Because unless you really botched a meeting and had nothing intelligent to say in that meeting, first of all, they're not usually talking to you if they don't think you have something of value. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. They have lots of choices. They're very busy. So if they're having the conversation, they obviously have a degree of thinking that you must know something of value. And to now suddenly decide that you have nothing of value means that they have to admit that they were a really terrible judge of character to begin with. So they're not really predisposed to shifting their opinion that quickly on you. I think that's important to remember, right? So if you go back to them and you say, I've been giving a lot of thought to your project and to your company and to what you're trying to accomplish, all I'm hearing is you've been thinking about me, and you have something better. And now I'm intrigued. So now I really want to talk to you again. So I think people, they're always looking for why people are going to judge them harshly. They're not really predisposed to judge you harshly if they've already given you time. They're rooting for you.
Right.
They're rooting for you. They do not want to have to go find another consultant.
Right.
They are rooting for you. So you have to remember that as you're going through the sales process. They want you to be an amazing consultant. They want you to blow their socks off. So you've got a lot going for you. And I think So many small business owners are so convinced that it's like all going against them when so much is going for them.
I think that's a great point. And you were mentioning about how you can go back to someone and say, "Hey, I've had these new inspired ideas." And sometimes the questions I get are like really basic stuff like, "Well, now it's kind of clear, but back in the day, like I'm not even sure we're supposed to be on site or not." Right? Like it's a really basic thing, and I feel so stupid. I didn't even ask them this. And it's like, well, you can guess, or you can just ask them, and it's totally okay to say, "Hey, I got so excited about what we were talking about. I forgot to ask you this basic question. I feel really dumb, but just tell me." And like once
you don't even have to qualify it.
Right.
You don't even have to qualify it. You can just say, "By the way, as I was putting this together, I want to check in. We love to do work on site where you think like it's really oftentimes the first draft has all these qualifiers in it. And then I tell my clients, go get rid of all the qualifiers and learn to just ask the questions. And women especially, I mean, this is scientifically proven. Women tend to have a preamble that says, this might be a dumb question, but, there's all these things. And women consultants especially, you've got to learn to, and it's sometimes harder to do verbally in the moment, but in your emails, you have that edit pen to take out the apologies, the sort of, this might be a dumb question, edit all of that out. Ask boldly. What decision makers want are confident consultants. Because they're hoping you know what you're doing. So they want your confidence. And so I really encourage people to edit out those qualifiers. I would rather err on the side of being too much of a know-it-all than erring on the side of lacking confidence and not being able to lead an engagement or a project or a client. They're hiring you because you're a leader. So lead.
That's a great point. It's like we don't want a guide who might or might not be able to get us up the mountain. We want the guide who can absolutely frickin' get you up and down the mountain safely. You just have to do what I say.
Exactly. And that's what they all want. I was on, I know we're probably getting to the end here. Let me share this with you as I'm sure we're coming to a close. A couple of years ago, I was interested in hiring a PR firm. And I had my team search for options, and we identified about 3 folks that we really wanted to talk to. And I got on the phone with the 2 owners of the PR firm. And when we got on the phone, we had our niceties. And then at that point, one of the 2 owners said something to the effect, Ruben, of, so Angelique, so how do you want to do this? Do you want to tell us like what you're looking for and what your needs are? Do you want to hear a little bit about our PR services? And then the other partner chimed in and said, yeah, we've also done some cool stuff. I mean, we could tell you about that. So, what are you looking to get out of this call? And I was just in that moment, I instantaneously ruled them out, like in that nanosecond, because I thought to myself, I'm not going to work with a team that twinkle toes around about my PR. I want bulldogs. I want people who come to the table and say, we've looked at your brand. We've looked at your target market. This is what's going to be the best use of our time together. This is what's going to position you the best. You don't have to do all the thinking, Angelique. We're thinking for you. And I kind of want to share this in terms of that do list versus that don't list. Take the mental heavy lifting off of your prospects for them. Do not they have so many things already. Their whole team is putting everything on their shoulders. All their superiors are putting everything on their shoulders. They're having to make decisions. They're having to wade through so much information every single day. Not to mention our home lives are complicated. Like right. we have our home stress. Like if you can take some of that mental lifting off and say, we've done the research, here's what works best. This is what's going to be effective for you. I mean, taking it off of your clients or your prospects' plate is really what they want when they're working with someone on the outside. So that I knew right away, I was like, wow, if you're going to come to the sales call this way, am I going to have to tell you how to do your job as my PR firm? Because I don't have time for that crap. I really don't. Right. So that for me, that was, that happened to me in corporate all the time. And it's happened to me as a small business owner too. It's really a shame when that happens.
That's a great point. And I'm sure I caused a lot of that when I was starting off consulting, but I can remember certain meetings where the person understood that I got it and that I was going to fix their problem. And you could just see their shoulders relax.
Yeah.
It's like,
It feels
okay,
good.
thank God, because I am up to my neck in issues. And this is one thing that I'm just going to like assign you to deal with, and you're going to go deal with it. Thank you.
Well, and let's think about the zone that we're in right now, this environment, because they're cutting 10, 15, 20, 25% of their staff. So they are going to still, unfortunately, inside of companies, senior leaders never reduce their expectations,
Right.
even when they slash budgets and teams. So if you think about that, the more you can take off their plate, even during the sales process, to say, we need to have 2 meetings. This is what we're going to do in the first meeting. This is what we're going to do in the second meeting. This is how long the meetings need to be. This is what we're going to share with you. We'll make our recommendations to you. I mean, taking that kind of stepping up, I mean, that right there separates you from 99% of the other vendors, service providers, consultants in the field.
Well, it's like you don't want to walk into your doctor and have the doctor say, well, what do you think we ought to do?
That is, yeah, that exactly. I mean, can you imagine you have a major medical problem and that's what your doctor says to you? You would go running for the hills.
Right. The doctor's allowed to ask questions and diagnose and all that. And
Sure.
what they recommend is going to depend on the answers. But they're not like, hey, what do you think? Should we do heart surgery today or not?
And they never apologize for asking the questions.
Great point.
They never apologize. They just ask you I mean, my poor mom, my mom was out doing sports and she tripped and she busted her head open, had to be rushed to the hospital.
Oh my.
And nobody at the hospital apologized for asking her the same question 70 times. Like they kept asking her the same questions. And no one apologized about asking the questions. They all had a job to do, from the paramedics to the 911 operator to the nurses to the doctors. No one apologized for asking her the questions. They had a job to do. They needed to take care of her. And she said a couple of the questions they must have asked 70 times, but they just needed to do it. And they were confident that they needed to really make sure. So I think that's a great analogy on a number of levels, Ruben, including not being apologetic about going through the basic, workup that has to happen before the more advanced stuff.
That's great. And is your mom doing okay?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. She finally is doing okay. It was really not a good time to be rushed. Like,
right.
The terror was to go to the hospital right now. Like, you don't want to get a secondary problem. So that was really the fear. But we've all teased her that she tried to stop the earth spinning with her face. So she's also our HR firm administrator here at the company. So the whole team has been giving her a hard time.
Oh.
So it's been a little funny that we've given her that hard time, but she's doing great. So thank you for asking.
Well, I guess if you can make jokes like that, she's doing okay. And
she's doing all right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time. This has been wonderful. And I'm glad you got to pour yourself a big glass of empathy,
Yeah,
which I think is
awesome
how the world should work on so many different levels.
It is. Well, cheers to you and to everything you guys are doing. We so love your show. So it's really been an honor to be on.
Thanks so much, Angelique. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you have a friend who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. Have a friend who wouldn't benefit, but you haven't talked to in a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and help me create the show that's most useful to you. And if you're frustrated with your sales and marketing process or lack thereof, check out Memorand, the CRM for people who hate selling. Until next time.